Hello, my name is Sulema. Welcome to the first episode of my conversational podcast, Overstimulated. As some of you can remember, I actually started a podcast in about 2020 or so. I named that podcast Safe Space, and I had a few episodes, but I actually stopped posting and continuing that creative project for myself. And some people ask me of like, why'd you stop? And honestly, it was the fear of being perceived. It was something I kept experiencing during that time, just having a hard time feeling safety and being perceived. And, when there's people who are no longer have access to you or are in your life, I did not want those sort of people to have access to my energy or my emotional discourse, mental discourse that I would share online. And for years, I've actually experienced that thought, and I've spent some time meditating on it, to be completely honest. And recently, as I meditated more about it and thought more about it, I realized that my fear of being perceived, if it was this idea of not wanting people to have access to me, but here I am letting those things dictate my behavior or things I would or wouldn't do. And I realized that although those people don't have access to me, they still did, because they were still, I was still thinking about them, still letting that get in the way. And so as a form of self-preservation, I actually stopped, and it's something that I've still thought about quite a bit, and I decided to start again. During some time, I did think of starting a sort of podcast called In the Backseat, and the dynamic was going to be like in the back of my car, and if I had any guests, I was going to have them sit in the back of my car with me. In terms of logistics and having that actually function, I just kind of thought that probably wouldn't work. Lighting, space. I'm a tall girl, so I didn't think the backseat is not for us as tall people, so I had to kind of go back to the to the clipboard and continue thinking. And so I came up with, it was kind of just an idea that came to me of overstimulated. I find that as I get older, I experience being overstimulated by the multitasking that comes from being an adult, making decisions, being in routine. All the things are just overstimulating to me. And so I feel like that's something that a lot of other adults who I talk to actually say that they feel the same thing. And so I thought, overstimulated, it seems to be a state that I spend a lot of time in. So overstimulated it is. And so I just want to welcome you and set up this space as somewhere to have conversations. For me, conversations are one of my favorite things. And discovering, allowing myself that curiosity of being a kid, of being in conversations that are deep, about different topics, intersection of things. I'm quite an intellectual. And so that are also silly things, just things that make us human. There's so much duality, and I feel like that's a type of space that I want to create. So yeah, I hope you welcome this and whatever resonates with you. I hope that stays in your heart and you're able to reflect and meditate on. I think that's the privilege of creating, is that you put art creation out into this world, and it can resonate to different people, and those different things can create a sort of cycle within this person. And so I think that since we're all a part of being humans, I think it's a beautiful thing. So yeah, I do want to start off every episode with a piece that I write, or a poem, something, a quote that we can focus on. Recently, I've been really in this journey of healing. I have for years now, and it's been quite stronger recently, just in terms of intention. And I wrote this piece after a lot of truth telling in my life, having hard conversations with people, and having hard conversations is not easy. Obviously, it's in the hard conversation, the name of it, but it's not easy of being able to really set a tone in a conversation and having it. And so I've been doing a lot of that in my personal life, and this kind of came to me in the shower today. I was a little nervous to do this, and so yeah, it's something that I wrote. With every breath I take, every truth I tell to others or myself, I release. Release feels like coming home. With every release, I breathe out and I feel my chest lighten. My spine straightens and I stand up higher. As if with every release, it gets me closer to myself. My spine, who has held me up even on days where I didn't feel like sitting up, my spine does this for me. Now I do this for her. So yeah, the idea has just been truth telling. And as a first generation Latina, this might be something you can relate to, but there's so many things that we don't know how to do. Even as this healing journey, I didn't know how to approach it, how to do it. There's a lot of unknown and lack of guidance. And I think that's the burden of being the first to do things that comes with figuring it out. And I think that's a skill that I've owned a lot, is figuring things out, and I continue to figure it out. I think that's probably what life is just figuring things out. And so I drew a lot of inspiration from nature. Earlier today, there's a large maple tree right there. And I moved my bed in the center of the room. And when I woke up, the sun rays were kind of peeking in my room, and I looked up and I was just looking at the leaves because I just realized it was a maple tree. My good friend gifted me a Lego set that's like a maple tree. And so I built it, and I realized like, oh, I don't know much about maple trees. So I looked it up and I looked at the seeds, and I saw it's like these little helicopter things. Those are the maple tree seeds. And I saw them on the tree. And so today I was looking at that. I could see the little leaves and the ones that are turning orange. And it's something that, seeing the leaves even change color in fall. I love autumn. It's one of my favorite times of the year. But looking at this leaf, I realized like nature has a blueprint. Animals have a blueprint of how to exist, how to be parents, how to heal, how to do anything. There's just like innate instructions within us of how to do things. And so I said, soon enough, I thought when I saw these leaves in the morning, soon enough, like these leaves are going to fall onto the ground. These seeds might create new plants. And it reminded me that the point of it all is to go back home. It's to be back in earth. And it's actually connected to a theory I had recently. Just so you know, I'm quite the thinker. I think a lot, and I think quite fast. And I saw smoke, and I saw the smoke go up into the trees. And as the smoke went up to the trees, I realized that I started to think about the atoms of the smoke and like the way those molecules were going to go into the air eventually. And that air was going to be a part of the cycle for plants, and it was going to be recycled back into earth. And that idea, for some reason, just really resonated with me and like clicked. Of even as humans, obviously as organisms, we are going to die. And that's super scary to think about, that when you really think about it, that we're all going to die. I think it's scary. It's something I think about, and I try not to because it kind of trips me out. But we are all headed there. And that seems really scary. But some people said that death feels like when you're going under anesthesia and you kind of just like, and I don't know if you've experienced going under. I have a couple times now, and it's actually a super peaceful feeling of just like falling asleep. And so I realized that death and these cycles of living are just going back to the earth. The same way the smoke goes up into the molecules and that's consumed by the trees, and these trees grow life and provide life for animals and shelter for humans and oxygen for humans. We all end up going back to earth. And it's this innate instruction that's within us of how to heal, how to exist, how to procreate, how to eat, all these things that are human functions. We have instructions within us. And so that's the way I've been approaching my healing journey recently is I have the answer that I need. I have the tools that I need, or I have the capacity to access the tools or try to access them. And I do want to say that can be quite the privileged perspective, because access to resources is incredibly political, and there is an intersection of identities and different obstacles that can get in the way of having access to things. And so that is a privileged perspective that I have been able to have access now that I'm an adult and I have a job that provides health insurance, which is quite the bare minimum, but that is not the case for everyone. I just looked up, it said 1111. Yeah, so I do want to recognize that privilege that comes from even having the capacity to heal. You know, I think of a lot of us who are first generation. If your parents were busy surviving and busy recovering from survival, after work and having kids and doing all those things, they're not like, you know what, let me meditate and start healing. It's quite the task. I don't have kids. I'm not in a serious relationship. I have all the capacity, and it's definitely a privilege, but I've also made that happen for myself. So there's duality there in how I've had access to this space. And also the intellectual capacity. I've always been quite the scholar. I've always been like kind of naturally smart, and that's not the case for everyone. And so there's levels to it. I feel like healing is very political. I mean, one thing I've recently been telling my friends is, how do we heal our nervous system when there's so much chaos happening in the world that can be triggering for our communities, but also other communities? Being a part of an ecosystem, other communities being hurt is a direct impact to us, just as people who exist together. So that's definitely a part of this healing aspect. This is a privilege. And it's so much work. I feel like people don't really talk about how much work it is of rewiring your perspective, restructuring your relationships, your lives, your routines around certain themes. It is a lot of work, and it bleeds into every dimension of your life: physical, mental, emotional, all sorts of relationships. It might even make you reconsider your goals and where you're headed. And so healing is quite the task, it's quite the project, and it is quite the commitment as well. And I understand not everyone has capacity for that, and so I do feel lucky that I've been able to have capacity. So back to this idea that I just kind of explained of always having the instructions of how to heal. I think that's probably what intuition is. Like, if we actually listen to our intuition, I think she or he would tell us a thing or two about where to go. And a lot of us have relied on outsourcing our intuition and our decision making or critical thinking skills, conflict resolution. We've outsourced by relying on others, whether it be letting other people dictate your behavior, your decisions, your beliefs, your goals. We are outsourcing, and so our own capacity and our own intuition gets limited because we are letting outside sources dictate where and how far we can go out. So I think that's one of the steps of healing is we have this innate instruction born within us, and it gets stronger when we respect and honor intuition. I feel like I've gotten to the point where when I'm thinking, should I do this? Should I do that? My intuition will be like, that it's super clear. And if it's not, if it's like, I don't know, I should do this or I should do that, I actually give myself a space of a time of, let's sit on that for a bit. Because I feel like when you're younger, it's easy to be impulsive, it's easy to be reactive, and it's something that I'm unlearning as well, is to give myself the space to make decisions and for my answer to be clear. And so those questions that you ask yourself, the answers are always there. You just maybe have to listen a little. Listen to yourself and listen to yourself, like your true self, not your traumatized self. So for example, if you've been in abusive dynamics, relationships, narcissistic ones, you have been taught to please other people. And so even you aren't conscious of it, I think you are acting as a traumatized person. Those traumatic experiences are projecting into your life and your decisions and bleeding into your intuition. I do think that with a lot of time and nurturing, your intuition does get stronger, regardless of what you've experienced. And that trauma might still be there, but I feel like the more you develop that skill, it's there. That's one of the biggest things too, is a lot of things are skills, like conversation, communication, conflict resolution. That's been a big one for me. I tend to run away. It's something I'm working through in therapy, and it's something I'm working every day in conflict resolution, of doing things as the most healed version of myself, not running away because of wounds. And sometimes these skills, or even your mental health, different aspects of that, those things helped you for so long, and that's why they're there. If you're someone that grew up in for example, an abusive household, yes, you flinch when someone screams, or you flinch when someone scares you. Your body has been wired to be hypervigilant to protect you. And so a lot of these skills, it was kind of like an unlearning while learning at the same time, of like honoring these skills have done something for me. And being grateful, and then recognizing that those skills are no longer serving me because they don't fit my environment, and being like, you know what? Thank you to this skill. This is why I'm hyper vigilant. This is why I'm hyper independent. Thank you, but you don't serve me anymore. You don't serve me to my higher purpose at the moment. You did for many years, and I'm really grateful for you for that. But this is just kind of where we part. So it's like recognizing what serves you, what doesn't. Yeah, so we're talking about healing. That's basically the theme of this conversation, is healing journeys. I do want to touch on this topic. I am a believer of that spirituality is connected to science and like actual physical things. I think some people get a little too woo-woo and can get lost in that. I being someone like that in the past. But there is science to a lot of these things. There is psychology, there is actual things that come from a lot of these ideas. One of them is epigenetics. So I took this course in college at UW, and it was one of my favorite classes ever. My advisor actually told me, don't take this class. You're an undergraduate. This is a graduate level course. There are students who are in this class who are UW medical students. The curriculum might be too aggressive or too advanced for someone who's an undergrad. But me being the stubborn young lady I have always been, I said, a man is going to tell me what to do or what I can't do? Absolutely not. So I took this class. I show up, and he was right. There were students who were getting their PhDs, who were in their MD, PhD programs, MD, or were taking a post-bac program to go to med school. I was quite surprised that was a demographic in this course, given the topic, social determinants of health. I guess surprised because it focused more on the less on the medical side of it and more on the like critical thinking of it, which was related to my major. It was one of the classes for my major. So I take this class, and we're talking about why one of the things we talked about was actually Black women, regardless of socioeconomic class, are more likely to die during birth or after complications than white women. And the statistic I remember was Black women who earned more than $100,000 a year and had a graduate level class were actually more likely to die during or after birth from complications than white women who had barely graduated high school. And so it talks about the differences in socioeconomic in this case, because they're Black women who are, have these careers, a lot of them lawyers, who are suffering things that poor white women weren't. And so I was learning about these things, and as an intersectional feminist, I was super into it. I was taking notes, loving this class. And it was the first class where I actually shared, because I felt like I had something to offer, and it's something that a skill I didn't have in the past. I was a lot younger. I've learned a thing or two since. And, or how Latinos were more likely to have diabetes based off this, and this, if they were first generation versus like fourth generation American. And so this is the world that I've seen as a first generation American. So I was like, yeah, I shared how I grew up in a town where the nice hospitals were the furthest ones out, and the staff tend to look different. And so for me, I just felt like I was sharing what I already knew, and my peers in this class, I found that they were surprised to learn the things that they were learning, some of them mostly being white and having come from a background where their parents were probably doctors as well. And so this class, we learned so much. It was one of my favorite classes ever. And we learned about epigenetics, where basically gene expression is impacted by environments. So that means that even if you aren't, or maybe if you're someone who has diabetes, it's not necessarily because it's genetic, but because the environment around you sets up like the perfect space for something like that to happen. The way I can describe it too is people who are generationally, like if your parents were super anxious, their parents were anxious, etc. It's like, was it because it's genetic, or because you guys grew up in an environment that facilitated like that? Obviously you were going to be anxious because that's the environment you're born into. And so through healing, I've been really focusing on the physical aspects of it recently, of feeling really processing the idea that you in your when you were in your mother's womb, she created you, but her eggs were created when she was in her mother's womb, and hers were, etc. It goes back. So I really thought of all of the things my mother has experienced, absorbing that energetically, but also through my DNA, through possible epigenetics. And then her mother, all the things her mother experienced, and the ways that impacted my mother, and she absorbed that. And then I inherited this cycle of tragedies, but also blessings. We often talk about generational trauma, generational curses, but we also have generational gifts, that come from that trauma itself, or just from your family. And so there's a lot of duality there. But that is one aspect of healing that I've thought about quite often, is epigenetics, and the way that our environments that are outside of our control, upstream factors that impact the way we exist, and why we're traumatized, why people grow up in poverty, why more people are prone to having diabetes and high blood pressure, and having to need dialysis because they have kidney failure, having heart issues from a lifetime of anxiety, from all of these physical manifestations of your state of mind caused by your environment. So everything is deeply political. That's something I talk to my friends about recently, more than other times. Everything is deeply political, which is also very frustrating, as like I said, how are we going to heal our nervous systems when the world is the way it is now? And let's not get started on that because this might be a long episode. There's so much happening in the world. How do we heal in the midst of this chaos? And to that, I would say taking breaks. I take breaks. Like, I take breaks from fighting the fight. I recharge, go back in. And I think it's a continuous cycle of taking breaks and going back in because the work never ends. And I have needs that I need to take care of. So in the midst of this chaos, taking care of your body, nurturing your nervous system, nurturing your mind and your heart, your relationships, I feel like that's the way to keep going. And with healing, this is a commitment, a journey, and it's lifelong. I think that's just the way things work. I say that because I started what I would call my healing journey in 2019 and 2020. And I've been taking breaks. I take breaks and then I go back in there, back in the healing chambers. I get back in there because there's more work, there's depth, there's more work to do. And I'm quite stubborn. I'm quite stubborn in intention, not just to, my ego. Chatting can cause a need for quenching the thirst. So yeah, that's one thing. And so when I think of back to epigenetics, one thing I've actually thought about is I would always say, I don't want to have kids. As a feminist, having kids, it's complicated. How am I going to break these barriers if I have a child, a human to raise? But one thing I will say, I will not have kids until my nervous system is healed. As best as my ability, when it's healed. Because the same way I was created in my mother's womb, during a time that, she had experienced a lot of tragedies and her mother had. A cycle. I do not want that to be my inheritance to my children. It's actually such a burden. I don't want to do that to my kids. And not just physically, but I want to give them these skills that I'm learning through therapy, through life. I want them to have a toolkit of ways to be resilient, of how to and how to do things in a way that's really meaningful. Not just like, oh, it's not a big deal. Pray it away. If you're Latino, you heard this a time or two of like, mija, nomás te tienes que rezar a Dios. You've heard it a time or two. And I don't say this to mock my parents. I've heard other parents say this. I've heard my friends say this about others. I have all the love and respect for my folks. But like I'm saying, is a genuine way of approaching these issues and these life experiences. Not just a way to just like, oh, let me just put it under the rug. I want to face it forward. I want to look at it in the eyes and ask, what is this trying to teach me? Keep it pushing. And I want my children to be able to have the same. And if I don't have kids, any of my descendants, whether that be my nieces, nephews, my friends who have kids, other people who come after me, it does not have to be blood. Or anyone who I meet who just by sharing, I can have some sort of impact. We don't recognize the value of our existence sometimes and the way we can impact others. And so I am starting to acknowledge that because there's power in that. There's power in community and being a member and knowing that your existence impacts others. And I will not negate that or try to diminish it because I'm projecting my insecurities. Don't let me nerd out about this because I will talk about this all day. I'm really passionate about this. But yeah, I started my healing journey in 2020. It was COVID. I was dating someone and I had a hard time receiving love. I was like, I didn't work for this. Why is he giving it to me so easily? And I remember the day I journaled about this. I think it was during COVID. I was like, why am I having such a hard time receiving love? And I went into this spiral and I remember that day, that evening, like it was yesterday, and that's when it started. So I've been taking breaks and coming back in. But yeah, there's just so much, and even creating this is a form of my liberation. I feel like I am liberating myself by approaching this and doing this. It's not comfortable. It's overstimulating. Get it? But there's power in creation. One thing I was thinking about is, when am I not thinking? But creation as women, any gender, right? But as a woman, I was thinking about the womb and just connections of that spiritually and physically. My womb, any womb, the biological purpose is creation. One of them is creation. And so the woman urge to create, whether that be art, giggles, laughter, comedy. If you know me, I love to share my comedic creations. Whether you're someone who likes to paint, draw, I love artists. I love people who can draw. I'm fascinated by you guys. People who create music, people who write, people who create content, people who create anything. There's so much power in creation. It feels, as a woman, it's like this urge to create. It's like it feels like a giving birth spiritually. Stay with me. But yeah, it's just, I feel like even nature, there's creation there. And so I am personally a part of all of this, is finding a balance of creation where I'm not only consuming media, music, I'm also creating. I'm providing as a form of balancing this cycle. Because as a community, if we're all consuming food, but no one's creating the food, we're gonna run out. And obviously it's not the same, but I mean it in the sense of, as to be a part of this process, of this energetic process, as a form of being in community, you also have to create. I feel that I am attracted to the creation aspect of it a lot recently, and not just consumption. There's power in both, obviously, but I just find that balance is something that I am very interested in recently. But yeah, so this is part of the things I've been thinking about recently. There's a lot more that I could talk about when it comes to healing, the different intersections of identities, the different experiences, different access, the way that, things bleed into this in terms of science, our cells, and the way our genes can be expressed differently through our environments, political things that impact us upstream, especially during this time. So healing is a deeply complex experience. It's layered. It takes years, and it's basically never ending. And it's a commitment that you have to make for yourself, or that you have to just commit to doing it for a while so you can reap the benefits and then maybe not heal again. And so I invite you to heal. I invite you to look within yourself curiously, as a child would, and reconnect to that part of yourself, or reconnect to your inner child, and see what's there that is in your control. Because obviously political stuff, we got to recognize that. What is in your control that you can analyze and be like, oh, I'm looking for the love I didn't have in my childhood, through dating, through doing drugs, through whatever the case might be. Going out. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I feel like a lot of people are looking for something that's missing within themselves. So I invite you to, start your journey, or continue if you've been taking a break. I know I do. And invite that in yourself. Your inner child deserves to be seen, and you deserve to give yourself the life that you're willing to work for. And if you're not willing to work for it, then you're going to get what you deserve. And so that's up to you sometimes. So yeah, thank you for sharing this conversation with me, for watching it if you got to this point. And I hope anything that resonates with you stays in a intentional, loving manner. Oh, my AirPod fell. Oopsie. And thank you for watching. This is the first episode of Overstimulated. I'm Sulema, and until next time, bye.